Hey everybody, Coach Jack from Common Sense Keto. Today's video is going to be a little bit about how science can be misconstrued and misrepresented to push your agenda or push your narrative, whatever you want to call it. There's an awful lot of versus videos or response videos on YouTube where it's pretty much one-sided, and this is going to be my one-sided as well, so I guess I'm not bashing the one-sided nature of anything. It's just to show that you can use little snippets of any study or data that you want to portray the message that you want to portray, and I'm going to do that as well today. And somebody else, I'm sure, could come on and refute what I'm saying using their own little snippets. So I urge everyone to take every bit of data that's presented in any presentation and review it for themselves and get the full picture of everything. Don't just go off of what somebody says. Don't go off what I say. I'm going to list all the studies that I've used, and you're welcome to go look at them yourself and see if I've misconstrued them in any way and twisted them to my own means. I don't intend to do that, but we all have that capacity within ourselves to see what we want to see. So I like to believe I'm not doing that, but it's always possible that I am. So again, I'll put this links to the studies in the notes of the video, and I urge everyone to go look at the studies themselves to make sure. I'll do my best effort to get every study in there that I've spoken about. So if I forget one, mention it in the comments, and I'll be happy to put the link in for you after the fact. Okay, so what we're going to look at is a video by a really popular YouTuber, Vegan Gains, responding to another fitness person. I don't really know much about him. His name's Chris Kruger. I believe he's into low carb dieting. As far as I can tell, he's had a transformation from that, similar to what many people have. He looks like a very healthy guy, and he sounds pretty logical, and he's funny. The video he had is funny. I urge everyone to go watch it. I'll put the link into that as well. So let's get into it and see what the first thing that Vegan Gains has to say about Chris Kruger.
So this paper was published in the American Journal of Cardiology. So what they did was they took patients who all had no cardiovascular risk factors. So they didn't have high BMI, they didn't smoke, they didn't drink, they had adequate levels of physical activity. So basically otherwise healthy individuals, and they looked at their LDL cholesterol score. Well, as LDL cholesterol increases, you can also see an increasing severity of atherosclerosis. So keep in mind, like as you go up this ladder here with increasing LDL, these people aren't smoking more, they're not exercising less, they're not fatter. The group is all the same. This was all controlled for. The only real significant variable here is their LDL cholesterol score. And it isn't until you get below 70 milligrams per deciliter that you see no atherosclerosis. So if LDL cholesterol wasn't the only risk factor for atherosclerosis, then why do we see this very clear increasing trend in severity of atherosclerosis with increasing LDL cholesterol?
Okay, so that was pretty convincing looking from that standpoint, from just him speaking in isolation. But he misrepresented the actual setup of that study. He said they controlled for every other factor for cardiovascular disease, including BMI, exercise, lifestyle. They did not. There was only a couple of very lenient factors they controlled for. One was current smoking. So current smoking. At the time of the study, they were not smoking. They could have been smoking before that, right up until the point of the study. They might have quit the day of the study. We don't know. They might have never smoked. We also don't know, but we can't assume that they were lifelong non-smokers. And they specified current smoking. Those were the words used in the study. Next thing is blood pressure above 140/90. So the normal blood pressure is 120/80. So they did include some people with high blood pressure in the study. Not severely high, but still high. And they also didn't exclude anybody with low blood pressure, which is also a problem. They excluded high cholesterol, over 160 milligrams per deciliter for LDL cholesterol. I find it very interesting that they use that as the cutoff point. I guess that's mostly because 160 is considered a fine level to have as long as you don't have more than 2 risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So I guess that's probably why they cut off there, but it becomes interesting later in the video why that's fairly critical. If they continue past there might be a different story to tell. And unfortunately, that would go against the narrative that they're trying to tell, so it's convenient that they chose that as a marker to cut off at. Next is fasting blood glucose, under 126. That's interesting. I rarely see anybody with a blood sugar over 126 unless they're sick. My normal fasting blood glucose is anywhere from 60 to 90. So 126 is considerably high. So they had some people in there with dysregulated glucose metabolism to begin with. Okay, no problem. And let's see, that's it. Actually, they didn't control for BMI, drinking, exercise, marital status, or diet. So essentially, no lifestyle factors whatsoever were considered, except for that of current smoking. So that was a bit of a misrepresentation. We can't say that all lifestyle factors are considered, all risk factors are cut out if they only used a few select biomarkers to determine the factors. So, okay, let's move on.
So again, there's a reason why people have these opinions, including some of the best experts in the world, like Dr. William C. Roberts. It's because the data actually suggests this. At most. So here's another paper written by Dr. William C. Roberts, 20 questions for atherosclerosis. So he actually addresses the animal model issue of inducing atherosclerosis in animals. So he states atherosclerosis affects only herbivores, dogs, cats, tigers. Lions can be saturated with fat and cholesterol, and atherosclerotic plaques do not develop. The only way to produce atherosclerosis in a carnivore is to take out the thyroid gland. Then, for some reason, saturated fat and cholesterol have the same effect as in herbivores. So when atherosclerosis is induced in these animals, there's some sort of defect in their metabolism. Dr. William C. Roberts, obviously, he isn't a veterinarian. He is a bit wrong here.
Okay, so I just wanted to stop here and talk about this section a little bit because Richard likes to hype up this Dr. William Roberts. He thinks he's the foremost expert on the subject, so his opinion is valid no matter what. Yet he goes on to say, nope, sorry, he's actually wrong about this aspect, about the pets and the atherosclerosis induced in them in certain procedures. No, he's wrong about that because he's not a vet. Well, Richard is not a vet either, but apparently he thinks he knows that trade as well as a vet. But unfortunately, it didn't help him in almost killing his dog by feeding him a vegan diet. And from what I understand, his dog is a breed called a wolf dog, and it's, this is a carnivorous animal. So feeding it only a vegetable-based diet is the epitome of ridiculousness. They've since switched it to an all-meat diet, thank goodness for that, because that's what the dog is meant to eat. So it is funny, though, that a strict militant vegan like Vegan Gains or Richard feeds his dog raw meat. I guess it was his wife that really made that decision. Happy wife, happy life. So let's that's all I wanted to say about that. So even the highest of the high, like Dr. William Roberts, can be wrong.
There is an optimal healthy range for LDL cholesterol in your serum. Just because every cell in your body uses cholesterol, that doesn't mean there's an unhealthy range for serum cholesterol. That's like me saying, oh, well, like almost every cell in your body needs iron. Okay, well, does that mean there's literally no dangerous level of iron in your serum? I can just swallow as many iron supplements as I want and nothing will happen?
Okay, so comparing cholesterol consumed to consuming iron supplements is not even remotely valid. You can't compare two things like that. One is a heavy metal that is required by some cells in very minute amounts to a vital nutrient that is required by nearly every cell in the body and produced in many of those cells for themselves. our liver synthesizes massive amounts of cholesterol daily because it is required, and iron is only required in small amounts, and it quickly becomes toxic because it is a heavy metal. And if you look at the current dietary guidelines from 2016, it states in there that cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. I'll put the link to the latest, to the 2014 meeting where they addressed that. It is in bold letters. I'll put it up here in the corner. You can see that now. Cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. It's been well documented that massive levels of dietary intake of cholesterol have very minute effects on lipid levels and of cholesterol, or blood levels, serum levels of cholesterol. And whether or not that has any impact on general health is yet to be determined. So it's still hotly up for debate, and apparently it's not debatable enough that it's been taken away as a nutrient of concern. There is no longer a target for cholesterol consumption in the dietary guidelines. Whereas iron, there is a strict regulation on safe upper limits. That is determined between 10 and 20 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Above that is considered extremely toxic, whereas there is no upper limit of safety for cholesterol consumption according to the current guidelines. Okay, so let's move on.
So not every cell produces cholesterol. That's just stupid. Cholesterol is produced in your liver. Really dumb statement.
So I had to stop here because this was too funny to continue past. So yeah, Chris, you big dummy, how do you not know that cholesterol's only made in the liver and no place else? I mean, come on. That's the most simplest of concepts ever. It's so simple that I guess every biochemistry textbook ever written and every human anatomy and physiology textbook and document ever didn't realize that it's made in many cells in the body. I'm going to put a little quip up here from Wikipedia. Even as basic as Wikipedia, dummies at Wikipedia don't understand that cholesterol is only made in the liver. They think for some crazy idea that it's made in the liver, in the gut, it's made in the brain, it's made in the adrenal glands. It's so big dummies. They're writing all the biochemistry textbooks and putting stuff up on the internet like on Wikipedia. They're so dumb. They're just like Chris. They don't understand that cholesterol's only made in the liver. So stupid. Such a dumb comment. Let's move on.
Okay, so he's probably going to rant about this for a long time. Basically, what he's trying to suggest here that patients with normal or subnormal LDL cholesterol levels were admitted for heart attacks. So this is after they had a heart attack. This isn't their lifelong LDL cholesterol score. So people who have 20, 30, 40, 50 milligrams of LDL cholesterol, which is even below the normal, healthy, safe physiological range, they have heart attacks. Well, that wasn't their cholesterol their entire lives. So this is the problem with like this cross-sectional data. You're only taking a brief snapshot in time, and you're assuming this brief snapshot in time is representative of their serum cholesterol throughout their entire lifetimes, which it's not. And look, when you look at this chart, as you go up, you see increasing rates of heart attacks. So I don't see this as evidence that LDL cholesterol is not a risk factor for heart disease.
Okay, so the next part is, talking about this study. It's a very interesting study. Of course, I'll put that down in the links as well. Richard doesn't really know what this study is, and it's clear by him speaking to it. This was a study of people admitted to hospitals for a heart attack, not a sprained finger, not to get stitches, not for the flu. They were admitted for having a heart attack, and they all had their cholesterol numbers taken upon admission. So this was it was 136,905 people, I believe was the exact number, of all different backgrounds. The only criteria was that they had a heart attack. Nothing else was sourced out besides that, and they had their cholesterol numbers taken. And now Richard says, it's this was when they had a heart attack, so clearly the heart attack lowered their cholesterol, and this was not their lifelong cholesterol. But nowhere in the study does it say that this was not their normal level of cholesterol. This is an assumption on Richard's part, and he's making it only because it doesn't fit his narrative otherwise. That's the only way he can make this explainable or refute it, as he says he's done in the past, is by saying, clearly this was not their cholesterol before the heart attack. You know, there must be some other mechanism, there's some reason that their cholesterol dropped to an acceptable level. You know, having a heart attack makes your cholesterol drop. So that must be the explanation for it. These people all had super high cholesterol before, which caused their heart attack, and the heart attack magically caused their cholesterol to drop. Now, yes, as he states, as cholesterol goes up, heart attacks go up. More people are in those buckets of heart attacks. But if you notice, it drops off right around 100 and starts declining, the amount of people that are having heart attacks. And it sharply drops off after 160, which is interesting about that study that Richard loves to show, is it only went to 160. So I find that pretty interesting. If they had continued that study all the way up to 220, might it have shown a different picture? I think it would. So it's very interesting that the data that he likes to choose is a quick snapshot in time. It would have been interesting to see that data only from 160 to 220. What would have that told? So it's quite interesting. And actually, on the point of cholesterol dropping when you have a heart attack, so it seems like if cholesterol, it drops so much, and heart attacks are so effective at dropping people's cholesterol, maybe we should develop a vaccine that gives people a small heart attack and drops their cholesterol level, because you know that would protect them from a future heart attack, right? To have low cholesterol. So I think we should get to work on that and patent it immediately. A heart attack vaccine, you know, it's like the flu vaccine. It gives you a little bit of flu, not enough to really make you sick with the full-blown flu, but it protects you against the full-blown flu. So we'll give you a little bit of a heart attack, we'll drop that cholesterol, and you'll be protected in the future from more heart attacks. We should patent that immediately. I think that's a winner. It's a winning strategy.
Again, you're taking a small snapshot in time where you're assuming that was their cholesterol score throughout their entire lifetime, which obviously it wasn't.
Okay, so this little part here, his point about this is just a snapshot in time. Everybody needs to realize that almost every study ever done is a snapshot in time. They're not monitoring people over their entire life. I mean, there's some studies that follow people for 15 years, but they're not checking on them every 5 minutes. They're checking on them usually twice to 3, maybe 4 times max within a 15-year span. And they assume the couple times that they check on them is their lifetime numbers for everything that they're looking at. All studies are a snapshot in time. Richard's favorite study, he uses every single point is a snapshot in time, only a snapshot. So the point saying that this is just a snapshot in time is completely irrelevant. It's not an argument. It's not debunking anything. And just because you use the words obviously, it doesn't make it obvious, and it doesn't make it true.
Disease can both directly and indirectly affect your LDL cholesterol. I know Jimmy Moore, the fat son of a bitch who promotes these like Atkins type diets, he said he normally has a cholesterol score like above 300, like 350 or something. He got the flu and it dropped down to like 150, like massively.
Okay, so this is Richard's typical MO, insulting somebody. So insulting somebody's weight and calling their mother a bitch is not really strengthening your argument in any way, shape, or form. And to use Jimmy as an anecdotal bit of evidence saying that he got the flu and dropped his LDL by 150 milligrams per deciliter is not evidence to your point. There's no evidence out there showing this actually happened to Jimmy. This is just you saying it happened, or you saying he said it happened. So hearsay. That is not an argument towards this, and there's no data to back up your point. So again, insulting somebody and insulting their mother, I know that's your favorite MO, but it's not really strengthening your argument in any way, shape, or form. Anecdotes as well are not evidence. That's brought up to me tons of times when I talk about people that I've helped And myself, I'm just an anecdote. So, and that's my own anecdote. So you certainly cannot use an anecdote from somebody else's anecdote to push your point or your agenda forward. Not an argument.
Both as a direct and indirect consequence of becoming ill. So getting an infectious disease, getting cancer, getting a heart attack, the drugs they put you on, just the consequence of not feeling so great, not eating much. Maybe there's some other, maybe the disease just affects your metabolism in some weird way that lowers your cholesterol. It's very common to see this sort of thing, especially in elderly populations. When people start to become ill, when they get elderly, you see a drop in their cholesterol score. So this is a very common phenomenon. You can't just say, oh, well, people got heart attacks when they had an LDL cholesterol score of like 20 milligrams per deciliter, so you must be full of shit. Well, no, you're just assuming they had that cholesterol score throughout their entire life.
So the next point, it's super common to see lowered LDL in sickness. If it was so common, it should be easy to find a massive amounts of studies showing this, yet I couldn't locate any. Mind you, I didn't spend 2 hours searching. I went on Google Scholar and I used 6 different search terms in order to try to find something. I couldn't find a single study that indicated that being sick lowers your cholesterol. What I did find was lots of studies showing that lowered cholesterol is associated with getting sick. So not that being sick lowered your cholesterol, which I know you like to use reverse causation. No, lower cholesterol is related to sickness. There is also many studies on elderly people and their low cholesterol. And there's nowhere in these studies that it actually shows that they got low cholesterol as a result of sickness. It shows that they got sick as a result of low cholesterol, and it further points to that the fact that people, elderly people especially, with higher cholesterols live longer, get less cancer, and are at less risk of all-cause mortality. There's also a point to be made that it's very typical that people with higher levels of LDL cholesterol are less susceptible to states of infectious disease. So that's very common. I'll get into people with familial hypercholesterolemia later and how they outlive people when they don't have heart attacks. But yeah, so there's no studies showing that getting sick lowers your cholesterol, and especially that having a heart attack lowers your cholesterol. There is no evidence of that, and there's no data for that. There's no data supporting that. These are just your anecdotes. The main driver for people's cholesterol dropping when they become elderly is typically they move into an assisted care home, and having family members that just passed away being in a care home, I see what they're fed, and they're fed crappy processed carbohydrates and very low fat and very low protein. And this is well known to lower your cholesterol levels. So it's not that they're getting sick and their cholesterol levels are dropping. Their cholesterol levels are dropping and they're getting sick. They're becoming malnourished. They're wasting away their muscle mass because they're not eating enough protein, and all their fat-soluble vitamin statuses are dropping because they're not being fed any fat. It's nothing but pudding, porridge, and processed crap all day and all night. So it's not their sickness creating the low cholesterol, it's the low cholesterol creating the sickness. And those are the studies that are out there, not the studies pointing in the opposite direction. It's not reverse causation.
Let's just bring up some data. So look, when you control for heart disease risk factors, LDL cholesterol is directly associated with severity of atherosclerosis. We already went over that data. And the PCSK9 gene mutations, give me a second. Yeah, so sequence variations in PCSK9. So again, of the 3,363 black subjects examined, 2.6% had nonsense mutations in PCSK9. 1/3 of these people were smokers, by the way, and a 28% reduction in LDL cholesterol resulted in an 88% reduced risk of coronary heart disease. So look, if we have genetic epidemiology showing us that if we lower our LDL cholesterol, just through our genes, so no other diet and lifestyle factors, that massively reduces our risk of coronary heart disease, well, what the fuck does that tell you? Do you think that's better data than assuming things from this chart, or does the genetic epidemiology sound like a better set of data to rely on?
So yeah, we did go over that study already, your only study that you've shown so far in this entire presentation. And it's also the one that you misrepresented and misconstrued the setup of the study. So yeah, we've seen it. We don't need to see it again. So the next thing you bring up is very interesting, actually, the PCSK9 studies on the mutations. Now, you also misconstrued this. They didn't control for lifestyle factors. Again, they controlled for the same factors as they did in the previous one. They ruled out smoking, but only current smoking. They ruled out high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and that's pretty much it. They didn't rule out exercise, lifestyle factors, diet, and they segregated Black from Caucasian. That was the only criteria that they mapped out for the study. So yes, it does show that the people with a very low cholesterol due to PCSK9 mutations did have a significantly less amount of heart attacks. Yes, but there's a very important factor that is missing from this type of study, and it's missing on purpose, and that is the prevalence of other illnesses, other diseases, other sicknesses, and all-cause mortality. Any study that does not use all-cause mortality as an endpoint is utterly useless, in my opinion. So what if you don't have a heart attack? So what if you don't die from a heart attack if you're dying from something else? So I have a surefire cure for death from nearly everything. There's only one thing it won't cure death from. So you won't die from a heart attack, you won't die from cancer, you'll be perfectly safe from getting hit by a car. You won't die by stabbing. There's no way you can die from any of those things. There's only one thing you're going to die from. And the cure to that is called skydiving without a parachute. So 100% chance you're not going to die from anything else other than hitting the ground at terminal velocity. 100% chance you're going to die of that. But I'm going to design a study on jumping from an airplane without a parachute and show that heart attacks are reduced by 100%. And that's why a study not showing prevalence of other diseases popping up make a study irrelevant, really, or especially all-cause mortality. Because so what if you don't have as many heart attacks if you're dying from cancer? And I'm going to put a study in below, and I'm going to put a picture up here referencing this fact that people with ultra-low cholesterol, like these people with the PCSK9 mutations, they die more often from cancers and all-cause mortality. So big deal. They're not having heart attacks. They're dying from other causes. So we got to realize that there's a reason for all of this stuff. There's a reason people have certain LDL levels and other people have lower ones. And these mutations, like PCSK9, are not definite benefits just because people aren't having as many heart attacks. I would rather die like that from a heart attack than spend 6 months suffering with chemo and having all my hair fall out from cancer and dying slowly and painfully. I'm sure anyone would be the same. So is that a trade-off? Does that make it better just because there's a benefit in one aspect and there's an increase in other death and diseases? How is that a benefit? It's just a trade-off. So we can't just assume that because you're not seeing heart attacks that you're not seeing other death or other illnesses as well. There's always got to be multiple factors involved in these studies. If you're just looking at one very specific endpoint, you're clouding the whole story. To the point is genetic epidemiological studies. Are those studies better than just assuming? These studies are assuming. They're very widespread. They're mostly based on questionnaires. They follow people for 10 years. They go see them 3 or 4 times. They have them fill out these questionnaires on, how many cigarettes have you had in the last 5 years? How many apples have you eaten? How many Big Macs have you eaten? People don't remember those things. It's highly inaccurate. And then they make broad sweeping generalizations based on 2 to 4 visits over a 10-year span and come up with these assumptions. So every single day there's a new epidemiological study coming out showing the exact opposite of one that came out the day before. So even just recently, we've had one saying the Pure study, I'll link to that below, came out saying that low carb is much, much better, much more beneficial. High fat is better. You're going to live longer. And the next week you got one coming out, no, low carb is going to kill you. Moderate to high carb is better. So you got to do this. They're both epidemiological studies. They're both studies, yet they say the completely opposite thing. So how can we say that these aren't just assumptions? They're completely contradictory, and none of them show the same result. So they're just assumptions. They're good for making a hypothesis and doing further study on. That's the only way we really can generate a hypothesis and, put case in point for an actual study to go forward. But we cannot use these as an assertion to anything or show causation to anything. They're simply associational, and they're used for making hypothesis, nothing more. So to use these as backbone of your argument for anything is absolutely ridiculous. So unless you have a randomized control study, which is the gold standard, or even what's even better is a meta-analysis of randomized controlled studies. And there's many of them out there. Unfortunately, there's not many that are proving any of the points that Richard is making.
About 13% of the people already have incredibly low LDL, and they're having heart attacks anyway.
Again, I've covered this in other videos, so I don't know why he's recycling that same argument. So basically what Chris Kruger has to do is he has to show us a study where they found some sort of genetic mutation resulted in a lifetime reduction in LDL cholesterol, and that lifetime reduction in LDL cholesterol was not associated with a decreased risk of heart disease. That's what he has to do. So if you're going to make the claim, well, oh, these people had low LDL cholesterol their entire lifetime, which this study doesn't suggest, they still had heart attacks. Okay, well, show us actual data showing us lifetime reduction of LDL cholesterol was not associated with reduced risk of heart disease or heart attack or any kind of cardiac event. You can't do that, so that's why you're not showing us the data, and you're just relying on these stupid fucking assumptions that I've already refuted.
So Richard, you just got to remember, LDL is bad, okay? Wow, Richard, you know what? From looking at the chart, I never would have thought of reverse causation. So you're saying people with high cholesterol are sick, and that gives them low cholesterol. So now people with low cholesterol are...
Okay, so he's trying to mix my words around, muddy the waters, and make it seem like my argument isn't very strong.
It isn't.
So what I'm suggesting is the people in this graph, that wasn't their lifelong cholesterol score. So, and this could be at the high or low end. Again, if you look at genetic epidemiology, lifelong lowering of LDL is associated with lower risk of heart attacks. What you're assuming here from this graph is that these people had lifelong low cholesterol levels, but they still had heart attacks, but you can't make that inference from that data. He's just trying to mix my words around to make it sound stupid. What I'm saying is, most of these people, if not all of them, they had high cholesterol levels, and I would say high LDL cholesterol is anything above 70 milligrams per deciliter. So all of these people had cholesterol levels above 70 milligrams per deciliter, and that resulted in them getting heart disease. And after they got sick, after they got really severe heart disease, after they've had a heart attack or two, what ended up happening was some of them had a reduction in their LDL cholesterol due to indirect or direct factors from the disease. So maybe they stopped eating as much because they had a heart attack, they didn't feel so well, or they were about to have a heart attack, they were feeling really shitty. I've had some family members who've had heart attacks, and they said, a few weeks or something beforehand, they really started to feel kind of funny. So they just don't eat as much. Food obviously has an impact on your cholesterol score. There might just be some other weird changes in their metabolism that caused a reduction in LDL cholesterol. Some of these people might have also been on medications that lowered their cholesterol. Obviously they have heart disease, so it's not out of the question that some of these people would be on cholesterol-lowering medications. I don't know if the study controlled for that.
So I love when people do this. They demand to show me the study. So Richard demands that Chris shows him a study of a lifelong study of people with low cholesterol that have the same risk as somebody with higher cholesterol. That doesn't exist. They don't have these studies. You don't have any studies either showing the opposite. You don't have any lifelong studies showing that people with ultra low cholesterol don't have cardiac risk. I mean, you have your one PCSK9 study, but that was 15 years. And it was a small group of people. There's 85 people with the mutation, and it didn't control for any lifestyle factors. So there could have been many factors, and it didn't show all-cause mortality as an endpoint. So again, they might have had less heart attacks, but how did they fare for cancer, diabetes, dementia? You know, how you can't say that it's automatically better just because they didn't have as many heart attacks. If they died 10 times more of cancer, then that's not a valid argument saying that it's better to have low cholesterol. So why does Chris have to have the data, but you can come up with just complete assumptions that the study that he's using is invalid because that's not their lifelong cholesterol, without anything to back it up whatsoever? You have no data to back up that wasn't their lifelong cholesterol. You just have anecdotes and assumptions that you've made. So Chris doesn't have to come up with anything. If you want to deny that his study is true, you need to come up with data showing that this wasn't their lifelong cholesterol levels, or you need to come up with data showing that there's people with super high cholesterol that always die of heart attacks. If LDL is causal, then everybody with high cholesterol should be dying of a heart attack. So, and we know that's not true. So just because Richard says he refuted something, like this study, he says he's repeatedly refuted it. He doesn't really even understand the study, so he's never read it, yet he's refuted it. Just because he says he refuted it doesn't make it refuted, and it doesn't make it not true. Maybe in vegan YouTube land, it means you refuted it, but in reality, it has not been refuted. It's a very good study, it's very powerful, and it's very telling. So Richard wants data, wants studies, so I have a study. I'm going to put up a little graph here, and as you can see, this is a graph of a huge clinical trial done on a statin drug. And as you can see from the chart, on the far left is all the people that didn't die, and they didn't die. There was two groups. One is the group that didn't die that were on a statin, and one is a group that didn't die that were on a placebo. So these people had their cholesterol lowered by a statin. 98.1% of them didn't die from a heart attack, or didn't have a heart attack at all, fatal or non-fatal, sorry. And 97% of them didn't have a heart attack on placebo. So that's 1.1% difference from placebo to non-placebo. That is not a very significant result. And if you look over at the actual mortality, it's less than 1%. So less than 1% of people didn't die on statin versus didn't die on a placebo. So this is not significant whatsoever, especially when you consider all the negative side effects of cholesterol lowering drugs. Like there's a higher prevalence for diabetes. There is a high chance of rhabdomyolysis, which is breakdown of the muscle tissue. A great deal of people talk about brain fog. There's a higher risk of dementia. There's also weakness, general fatigue. The list goes on and on. So for a 1% reduction in possible cardiac events and a less than 1% reduction in mortality, I will choose the placebo. Thank you. And again, back to the study, he keeps going on and on that Chris can't infer anything from this data, yet he assumes and asserts that this wasn't their lifelong cholesterol levels with no data to back that up. So he can make assumptions and false claims as much as he wants, but Chris isn't allowed to use the actual data that he's referencing as an argument. But he can certainly use just made up facts and numbers with no data to back it up. So he keeps going on and on about how Chris can't infer anything from this data, yet he uses assumptions without any data to back it up, period, that this wasn't their lifelong cholesterol, that heart attacks cause cholesterol to drop somehow magically. Maybe metabolism did something funny the week before the heart attack and dropped their cholesterol. Maybe they ate less, maybe. None of this is evidence for anything, and if it can't be backed up, it's not an argument. You can't use this to refute anything. And not having even looked at the study, you can't argue against the study without even reviewing it. And yet you just make assumptions about the data itself. Okay, so yes, and anecdotes about your family that they had heart attacks and they just weren't feeling right before and they ate less, so their cholesterol probably dropped. But anecdote, no data, no evidence, not an argument.
And what about these people that are having heart attacks at this end. Why didn't they have reverse causation?
What do you mean reverse causation? So again, I don't know how this data was assembled. This might just be crude data. It might not be per capita. So what might have happened was they just looked at total hospital admissions. The majority of people who are admitted just had cholesterol levels in this range. And then you see some people who have cholesterol levels in this range, but because it's more rare to see, there just isn't as much. So I don't know if this is crude data or adjusted for like population size or not, but I'm like, again, you're not explaining any of this, but what I'd say is the reason you don't see as many people here at the high end is because other factors are protecting them against heart attacks. They might have really high cholesterol, but still, they definitely do have heart disease, but there's other factors at play here that's protecting them against actual cardiac events. So they might just have more stable plaques, just because.
Okay, so what about the people at the top of the range? We just keep glazing over that. Cholesterol went down in the people in the normal range because they had a heart attack. So what about the people in the top of the range? Did their cholesterol go up because they had a heart attack? What's the mechanism behind that? Where's the studies to show that happened? Or did their cholesterol come down too and they just had super high cholesterol at levels that's rarely seen in humans? And why aren't there more people in those buckets? So Richard says it's because they're so rare. They're so rare that there is only 2.5% in the top 4 buckets of people having heart attacks. Again, this was a study done of people that actually had heart attacks. So it's because they're super rare. So let's look at how rare people with this level of cholesterol are. I spoke already about familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a genetic mutation where people have receptor issues, LDL receptor clearance issues, and they have super high cholesterol levels, usually well in excess of 190 milligrams per deciliter. So they fall right in that top bucket. And it is fairly rare, but it's not ultra rare, and it's very highly underdiagnosed. The current estimate of people with FH are between 600,000 and 2 million in the United States alone. And that rate is actually much higher in French Canadians and Northern Europeans. So it's not rare to see people with super high cholesterol. And yes, it is a fact that these people do die at a higher rate of cardiovascular disease in current day. If you look back, and I got some studies to link to about FH, and it clearly shows that before the change in dietary strategies to a higher carb, higher processed food, high sugar diet, these people lived as long and often outlived the general population. And it's referred to, the reason why is often stated that the high LDL seems to have a protective effect against infectious diseases. So they have an inherent ability to outlive people from the thing that used to kill people the most. Now that has changed around, and the thing that kills people the most is not infectious disease, it's heart attacks. They seem to die more often, but it's only as a relation to the change in diet. If you put these people on a proper diet, they still outlive everyone. They have less cancer and they have less infectious disease deaths. So there is benefits to high LDL, and I'll attach a study that actually talks about the actual problem that these people have. It's not their arteries plugging up, it's actually coagulation. That's the problem. And if we address that problem, these people should be advised that their LDL is actually a benefit, and it states that in this article. So there's that. So if LDL was causal, then that bucket in the highest 4 buckets would be the highest bucket, because it's not rare for people to have high cholesterol. If it was rare, the statin industry wouldn't be where it is today. And statins don't actually lower everyone's cholesterol that much. I have friends that their entire family has FH, and there's 5 members of their family that have FH. 3 of them have had heart attacks, and the only ones that had heart attacks are the ones that are diabetic, obese, and not fit. The other 2 are fit, lean, active, and they have no signs of heart attack whatsoever. they're all on statins, and they have been for 20 plus years, and their cholesterol on a statin is still in that 200 milligram per deciliter range, yet they're not having heart attacks, the two that haven't had them. So we started off with Richard's study showing that as you track up in LDL, you also track up in atherosclerosis. So it was stated as a fact that LDL is causal. As you rise in cardiovascular disease, you rise in LDL. So LDL is strictly a cause devoid of any other factors. Yet in this last portion, Richard said, yes, these people have high LDL, but there's some other factor, some magical protection that is protecting them against heart attacks. So which is it? Is LDL causal? Does LDL always track with risk? Or is there some magic protection in the higher ranges of LDL? So how could that possibly be? Either LDL is bad or it's not bad. So either LDL logically is bad or LDL logically is not bad. So you can't have both sides of the argument. Either it's bad and everybody dies that has high LDL cholesterol, or it's maybe not bad and there's other factors that come into play. That's probably the more likely explanation. So what we've observed in this bout between Chris and Richard is some dishonesty concerning study parameters. We've seen assumptions about LDL lowering effects of heart attacks and anecdotes about family having low cholesterol without any actual evidence or proof or tests due to sickness and heart attacks. And we've seen an agenda pushed without any actual data to back it up. The only data that was used to back it up is one study that cut off at the exact point pretty much where things start to change, and it was misrepresented in the fact that dietary and lifestyle factors were not taken out of the equation. And we had one gene mutation study that didn't show all-cause mortality as an endpoint, or even any other diseases that may come up. Let's throw cancer in there. So how many of the people with the mutations got cancer? Let's just throw that in there for shits and giggles and see what different factors may come up or different result you may see. So great, you're not dying of a heart attack, but you're getting cancer. So that's the end of, it's not the end of the video. It went on and on and on, but I didn't feel it was necessary to watch it any further or comment any further on it. It seemed to be the same arguments again and again and again. Chris was very funny. He was making light of the situation. It was a joke. I'm Canadian. He was making fun of Canadians. I thought it was great. I thought it was hilarious. I also have to say I do find Richard very funny. I watch his videos for the pure entertainment of it. His debates tip over the edge for me, and they get just monotonous sometimes, and I tend to tune out on them. But all in all, he's a very successful YouTuber, and I congratulate him for that. And I'll continue watching his videos because, again, I find it super amusing. But we have to be careful about misrepresenting data, using it to point to our specific agenda, and actually look at everything behind the data and try to see another perspective. So I'm a proponent of the ketogenic diet or even paleo diet. I like the paleo diet, but I've also tried a raw vegan diet and I saw some benefits from it. I saw a way to get a benefit from it. It's just not the way I choose to eat, and I don't think it's the most optimal way for people to eat. I do see both perspectives, and I think that I'm not against vegans. I think what they're doing is admirable. It's just not for me, and I don't think it's the way humans were meant to eat. And I don't think for them it's necessarily, I think they'd like to argue health outcomes, but it's not for them. It's not about health. It's about animal rights and animal welfare. It's what they believe in. So, and I applaud that. That's great. If that's what your belief is and what you're into, by all means, do that. The biggest problem I have is with misrepresenting data and using studies and making false claims about those studies to push an agenda. So we should be upfront, clear, and honest about anything we portray and only lay out the facts. That's the way to convince somebody to follow your movement or follow your direction is by being upfront and honest about it. If your direction is the right way, you shouldn't have to lie, you shouldn't have to fabricate facts or use data that doesn't exist or arguments that don't exist, like heart attacks lower LDL, and that's the reason why all these people had low cholesterol. So that's it for me today. I'll put all the links down below that I spoke about. If I missed something, put it in the comments and I'll make sure to add it. And always thanks for listening, and please subscribe below.